Hi, everyone. Amy, thank you so much. This is Laura Egan from the Clery Center, and I am joined by my colleague, Abby. My role at the Clery Center is the Senior Director of Training and Technical Assistance, and I've been here for about 2 years, but I do have a background working in both student conduct and residence life on a college campus as well. So I have intersected a lot with prevention work both on a campus and in teaching about what the Clery Act requires through it. So we're really excited to bring in some additional expertise today with having Holly join us from EVERFI to talk through some foundational aspects of prevention programming and then introduce a new tool to you all to use. Abby, would you like to introduce yourself briefly before I get into some more introductory pieces?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Abigail Boyer. I'm the Associate Executive Director of Programs here at the Clery Center. I've been here since 2012, and prior to that I worked in prevention education at a county victim service organization. And we're really excited to work with Holly for this webinar, as she's worked with us for NACSAM in prior years as well, with a lot of the great work that she was doing on a college campus, which I'm sure she'll talk about. So it's really incredible to kind of hear more from her in relation to the work that she's doing and that other institutions are doing in the field, and how we can bring that to our own campuses. So thank you, Holly, for joining us, and thank you to everyone who joined us.
Thank you so much. I am absolutely delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, Holly. We'll let Holly talk more in 2 brief seconds. I just want to make sure that we touch a little bit on why we're all here today. We are always liking to begin our trainings or workshops with a reminder of the life of Jeanne Clery, which is most of the reason why we are here today. For those of you that do not know, Jeanne was a student at Lehigh University when, in the spring of her first year there, she was devastatingly lost through being raped and murdered while on campus in her dorm room. And her parents, Connie and Howard Clery, in response to that loss, started a lot of work at both the state and local level to develop both legislation to address the transparency of campus safety, as there were no requirements at the time of Jeanne's death for campuses to share information on crime statistics or prevention efforts on college campuses. So Connie and Howard's work resulted in the development of what we now know today as the federal campus safety law, that is the Clery Act. And they also founded our organization, the Clery Center, which is a nonprofit training organization that does aim to partner with colleges and universities to learn more about both the regulations of the Clery Act and how to implement them on your unique college campuses. And over the course of our existence, we really have evolved just as the law has evolved. We have really centered our mission and focus on partnering with institutions of higher education, because we know that no one operates well in fear. So we don't want institutions to be afraid of not following the Clery Act. We just want them to have a more confident understanding of what it requires and how there really is no one right way to comply with the Clery Act, particularly when we get to talking about areas like prevention, because we want all of that work to speak to your individualized campus community in the most compelling way. And so some of the programs and initiatives that our organization offers includes National Campus Safety Awareness Month, as you are participating in today. We also have a Clery Center membership program that institutions can join as a team of individuals that gains you access to free and discounted resources such as trainings or tools, and access to a membership portal where you would have the ability to network with peer institutions and peer professionals in doing all sorts of work that's required under the Clery Act. We also offer a training program that we call our Jeanne Clery Act Training Seminar. We offer about 8 to 10 of those trainings across the country each year that focus on implementing the Clery Act. So if you are interested in learning more about any of those trainings, we have information on them on our website, which you can access at any point. And then speaking in a little bit more detail to one of our initiatives, we are nearing the end of National Campus Safety Awareness Month 2017, and our theme this year has been Take the First Step. We recognize that sometimes tackling a lot of the work in campus safety can seem very overwhelming, particularly if it is an add-on responsibility at your institution. So we really wanted to focus our efforts this year on breaking down some of those larger problems or some of those larger areas of work into manageable action items. And we wanted to pair a lot of those points with a resource that you could use right away. And so we'll be highlighting one of those tools today in our sample primary prevention program plan. But in addition to that, we've also offered a ton of other free tools and resources and webinars, which you can access through our website, naxam.clerycenter.org, as well as seeing some of those things that will be through the group discussion and files pod today. And today what we really will be focusing on is Holly will talk through understanding the foundations that are necessary to ground your prevention work on college campuses that will also support institutionalizing those things. And she will also go through the Sexual Assault Diagnostic Inventory, which is a tool that EVERFI has developed and has actually offered for institutions to use for free once you take the pledge and join their campus prevention network, which Holly will get into today as well. And she'll also walk through some examples of promising practices through case studies of specific institutions. And then we'll go back to Clery Center briefly at the end to talk through that primary prevention program plan that I mentioned, in addition to some other resources for you all. And so during this webinar, you will have the opportunity to respond to us and interact with us through some polls that we'll conduct, through some chat box questions that we might ask. You are welcome to ask questions of us, just as Amy was saying earlier, through submitting them through that group discussion pod or through the support or private Q&A pod. And then Holly will walk through that sexual assault diagnostic inventory as well. So briefly, too, we just wanted to do a quick refresher for those of you that might not be as familiar. The reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act added amendments to the Clery Act that expanded the rights for sexual assault survivors in general, and then also extended those rights to victims of dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking as well. And part of those amendments was a requirement that institutions have primary prevention programs and awareness campaigns available for all new students and employees, as well as current students and employees. Some of the elements that are required within those programs involve reviewing the definitions for the crimes of sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking within your local jurisdiction, in addition to the definition of consent in reference to sexual activity in your local jurisdiction, if there is one. If there aren't, then going through what those definitions are in your, according to the Clery Act, as those would be part of an institution's policy in response to disciplining any of those acts if they occur on your campus. A lot of the other elements required within those programs involve having information on risk reduction, as well as options for bystander intervention, as well as describing what an institution's policy and procedures in response to reports of those crimes are, and the rights and options that are available to survivors on campuses. And no one program must contain all of these elements, but all of those elements must be addressed over the course of a year, which certainly is a tall order, particularly as sometimes prevention work is conducted by maybe one full-time professional, depending on the amount of resources at your institution. So the biggest takeaway to understand from this refresher is that it is required to offer all of these programs to new students and employees, and then to have ongoing education occurring for matriculated students or current employees. So that's a major takeaway we want to make sure everybody understands from this. Some of the pieces that are required through the VAWA Amendments to Clery are highlighted in the VAWA checklist that we have included as a link in that files section of your screen right now. So if you do have any questions about what specifically should be happening at your institution as a result of the VAWA Amendments to Clery, that is a helpful link to reference. But now I'm just going to do a couple of quick polls to then get us into the content that Holly will lead us through. So we just want to make sure that we have a good idea of the folks that are in the room today. And this poll is asking for you to identify yourself as either campus public safety, sworn or unsworn. You might be part of a facilities or emergency planning department. You might be part of student affairs. And student affairs is a large swath of roles that we would include anything within residence life, student activities, Greek life. A Title IX coordinator could possibly be considered to be in student affairs. Anything that would deal maybe with counseling or violence prevention work, we would count all of that within student affairs. But you could also feel free to identify yourself as other. And if you are other, we would love to know what role or title or function you represent. So feel free to add an answer in for other into the group discussion box so that we just have a better idea of the roles and functions represented by you all today. We are seeing as the responses come in that a majority of the folks here are identifying as being part of student affairs or other, and as I see the others come in, I see some veterans affairs folks, Title IV compliance, a health educator or a wellness program coordinator, great. I see a lot of Title IX coordinators joining us, which is wonderful, welcome. A lot of folks that are working in case management, which is great to see. A lot of work also in compliance and investigation of such crimes or incidents, which is great as well. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. And then we'll conduct one more brief poll, and that is just asking if you were able to complete the sexual assault diagnostic inventory that you could find through accessing EVERFI's Campus Prevention Network. We just want to understand if we do have folks that were able to complete that before the webinar today, as that will help inform what Holly addresses throughout the rest of the webinar. So of the folks that are joining us, it does look that almost a little over 10% of you were able to complete that, which is awesome. That is so great. We know that that did take a lot of effort and time, as it is such a comprehensive tool. So thank you so much for dedicating the time to complete that. That's awesome. For those of you that weren't able to, that is okay. Just know that that could be a project that you could take on as a result of learning more about it through today's webinar. So thank you for your responses to those two polls. That's really helpful. So now I'm going to turn it all over to you, Holly. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we're so excited to hear more about your content.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, it's always such a pleasure to partner with the Clery Center. As Abigail noted, this is my second time in being invited to present during the National Campus Safety Awareness Month. And for us at EVERFI, one of the reasons that we really love to partner with the Clery Center is because we're always looking to do the best work possible with organizations that have significant expertise and significant integrity and can be trusted as thought leaders in the field along with the work that we're doing at EVERFI. So for me, this is such a perfect partnership, and I'm so delighted to be here. And I'm going to jump right in now to talk a little bit about our model for effective prevention as a grounding point to start the work that we're hoping that all schools and colleges will be able to engage in. So as you can see here on the screen, when we're thinking about effective prevention, oftentimes what we focus on first is that piece at the top of the pyramid, that programming module. So, the kinds of programming that we're delivering to our students and our staff and our faculty. But as you can see from this pyramid, a model for effective prevention includes a lot more as well. So we like to look at starting at the foundation for that institutionalization. And when we think about institutionalization, we're looking at, what is that system-wide buy-in? Is there visibility from your senior leaders to prioritize sexual violence and intimate partner violence prevention as a part of the core mission of the institution? Is there adequate staffing to ensure that the prevention efforts that are required actually have the human power to be able to manifest? What is the budget for those kinds of prevention programming? Looking at critical processes and policies, I think of this as being that glue that binds that institutionalization, so that core commitment to effective practice. And so, of course, we're looking at whether or not campuses are abiding by those policies and the federal and mandates, the state mandates that some of you are also acting under. Do communities have access to policies, to information? Are they widely distributed? Are they created in a collaborative way so that there's significant community buy-in? Is there effective evaluations and efficacy studies to ensure that the work that you're doing is meaningful and that it's achieving the outcomes that you've articulated and that you're tracking over both the short and the long term? And then we get to that programming. And when we look at programming, we're thinking about not only the what we are delivering, but how we're delivering it. Are we delivering programming that is both universal, but that is also adapted and targeted to our specific populations, both those students who may be at greater risk for experiencing harm, and also those students who are particularly poised to be effective on their campus in spreading information and behaviors and social norms that are positive and pro-social. Is there a theory behind that work? Is it modeled on a positive pro-social framework so that we're really focusing on the majority of healthy students and bringing up those positive behaviors? So all of those pieces really are a part of this model for effective prevention. So that model for effective prevention is what undergirds the development of our sexual assault diagnostic inventory. And I'm delighted to hear that almost 10% of you have already taken that diagnostic inventory. For you, a lot of the content we're going to be providing will be a really rich opportunity to benchmark your individual campus scores with what we see on the national field, as well as what we see from those campuses who have achieved an advanced standing. And so this is how we developed that diagnostic inventory tool. We knew that we wanted it to be a rigorous tool that was aligned with best practices approach that was gleaned not only from 10 years plus of research literature from peer-reviewed journals, from national organizations like the Clery Center, also publications and reports from state coalitions who have deep understanding of on-the-ground issues and programs that work. So we take that information and we identified 315 recommendations that we collapsed into 22 categories and 117 recommendations for best practices approaches when it comes to prevention across those three domains of institutionalization, critical processes, and programming. And so within our methodology, we at this stage have nearly 100 campuses who have completed the sexual assault diagnostic inventory. And in those campuses, we categorize the outcomes of the self-reported information that campuses put into the instrument into 4 buckets. Emerging, so campuses who are really beginning their prevention approaches and are looking for new areas that they can grow into to really grow their prevention strategies. Developing, so these are our campuses who have begun this work in earnest and are really building upon the work that they've already started. Our campuses that are proficient, so those are their campuses that are in the top third quartile of our prevention practices based against that data from research literature and promising practices in the field, and then advanced. And so as you can see from this distribution, we're really excited to note that overwhelmingly our campuses are proficient in their prevention practices. We have about 6% of campuses who across all of these domains are advanced in their practices. And we'll talk a little bit about what that advanced category looks like. And so for us, this is a really encouraging sign for our field that many of you are out there doing terrific work, and that with that solid, proficient foundation, you have a strong opportunity to build on that work going forward. So this is an opportunity for those of you who have not yet completed your sexual assault diagnostic inventory to identify where your campus might fall as it relates to these quartiles, and to consider how you can use that information to do strategic planning on your campus going forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to do a dive now into this that baseline category of institutionalization. So really, when we're talking here about building from the ground up, and I have to note that sometimes we see campuses that have tremendous strengths in their programming area, but don't have tremendous strengths when it comes to institutionalization. And one of the things that we find when that is the case is that those campuses may be more vulnerable to having that programming go away or disappear, that it tends to be a little more fragile when it comes to sustaining that commitment over time. And as we're looking at those VAWA Amendment to the Clery Act requirements, what we know is that institutions need to have that sustained, ongoing effort in addition to ensuring that all members of your campus community, students, staff, and faculty are receiving the opportunity as they join your community. They're also additionally every year getting ongoing opportunities as well. And so institutionalization is so important from that perspective. So when we're looking at institutionalization then, what we really focus on first is thinking about how do we get that core presidential leadership commitment? How do we gather that presidential focus? What we know is that a lot of things that are on the minds of our college presidents also are related to sexual assault and violence prevention. So certainly reputation, brand, and recruiting of students is a significant concern for college presidents. And we also know that when there are incidences of sexual assault on college campuses, that these can impact all of these areas, that it can certainly have a negative impact on a campus's reputation, that it can harm the brand that they've spent significant resources in bolstering and refining, and it can have some impact on recruitment. Certainly it has impact on safety, liability, and risk management. We would be remiss during National Campus Safety Awareness Month not to point that piece out. There have been impact for fundraising, donors' costs, enrollment, student success, and retention, which is absolutely at the core of at the core of the missions of our institutions, is something that is also impacted by sexual assault and can be bolstered by effective sexual assault prevention efforts. And so aligning the work of sexual assault prevention alongside these concerns that are on the minds of presidents, provosts, senior leaders is one important way to be able to boost that institutional commitment if it's not at the place that you want it already to be. I'm going to point out here a White House task force report that came out in January and unfortunately did not get the kind of attention that absolutely it merited. And so the final report from the White House task force to protect students from sexual assault is entirely about how do you focus senior leadership to harness those energies so that senior leaders are visibly committed to this issue on campus. Why is that so important? Well, as Vice President Biden has shared in the past, or former Vice President Biden has shared in the past, if sexual assault prevention isn't on the radar of the president, isn't on the radar of senior leadership, it simply is not going to get the attention that it deserves or the attention of other issues that are. And I love this quote that Vice President Biden shares in that report. And I would encourage participants in this webinar to take a look at that report for even more ideas about how you can garner that visible presidential leadership. And this is what we know about visible presidential leadership from our sexual assault diagnostic inventory. We see that those campuses who have achieved an advanced status across all of those domains, their presidents are talking about this issue 4 or more times a year. And they're not only talking about this issue, but they're talking about it in an informed and meaningful way, making sure that they're speaking appropriately both to students who have experienced harm as well as those who have been accused of committing harm, that they're talking about prevention in a holistic way to their entire campus and putting it on the radar. So this is something that we think is absolutely critical to creating a foundation for best practices and prevention approach. And now let's take a look at that institutionalization and this prevention staffing. So I really loved that Laura focused in earlier on the fact that those VAWA amendments to the Clery Act, which I want to stop here and just make a note for those of you who have been following a lot of the happenings over the past 2 months as it relates to possible or now in place changes to the Title IX guidance from the Office for Civil Rights. That Title IX guidance from the Office for Civil Rights is separate from the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act, and the prevention requirements in the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act have not changed at all, even though there is change in the Office for Civil Rights Title IX guidance. And there can be some confusion on campuses because sometimes it's hard to keep those two separate. And so I want to pause and make a point here to note that the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act prevention and education responsibilities have not changed and are not a part of the process of the notice and comment that's going to be going forward. Something really important to note. So now getting back to institutionalization. What we see here in all of that work that is required in the Clery Act as it relates to both incoming and ongoing prevention, that requires human beings, bodies on the ground in order to do that work. And so we look at that prevention staffing piece to think about, what does it take in order to, in terms of full-time equivalency, in order to have the vigorous staffing model to do the best work possible in this area. And so we can see that across the board here, we have for in aggregate about one full-time staff member per almost 9,500 students. We see that our smallest campuses are able to do their best, are able to achieve the highest FTE rate of 1.1 FTE for every 4,016 students. And we see at the very far end, for our largest campuses of 15,000 plus, we have 1 FTE for every 10,000 students. This is a place where I know that we need to grow as it relates to prevention work, that having one full-time equivalency for every between 4,000 and 10,000 students is unlikely to be able to move the needle in the way that we want, especially when we look at the levels of programming that the practice field identifies as needing to be in place in order for us to move that needle, to actually change a difference in the incidences rates, and also to shift knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, as well as behaviors, towards a positive direction. This is a place where, for those of you who have already done your SATE, you can take a look at your FTE and compare it to the aggregate. You can also take a look at this across the national. I had the pleasure of being at Juniata College yesterday, which is one of the campuses of 5 that we honored this past year for our Prevention Excellence Awards. And what is remarkable about this small liberal arts college, little over 1,000 students on campus, they have an FTE ratio of 1 FTE to about 700 students. And you can see that really places them in the highest echelons of commitment as it relates to prevention staffing. Now let's take a look at this prevention budget. So like staffing, I think of institutional budgets as being documents that reflect the priorities of an institution. So in that way, they are really helpful documents to identify what is our commitment around these issues. And so when you look at this prevention budget, and I'll note that this is data that excludes the costs of staff. So this is outside of your FTEs. What is that prevention budget? And what we see is that across the board, in aggregate, about $3.82 is being spent per year on sexual violence prevention efforts writ large. Again, we see that our smaller campuses have been leveraging more dollars per prevention at 557 for campuses. And that for our large institutions, again, we have the least investment at $1.55. And I think that this is really important to point out. Again, looking at that prevention staffing, then looking at this prevention budget, what we see is there's a lot of room to grow. And we have at the most $5.57 being spent for students in sexual violence prevention. And then you think about how many t-shirts have we given out to students over the course of an academic school year, and what was the cost of that t-shirt? Unfortunately, we find that some campuses are spending more money on the giveaways for other kinds of events than they are in sexual violence prevention. That, I would say, is an opportunity to reprioritize the way in which dollars are being spent, and also ask really important questions, because it's not only about how many dollars are being spent, but how are those dollars being spent? Are they being spent on programs that have a demonstrated efficacy, that are being evaluated, that have a basis in research, and that are integrated into a strategic plan that is already on place on your campus? Or are they expensive one-and-done speakers that may take half of a prevention budget and have none of those core components of effective prevention programs? These are important questions to ask on your campus. Okay, so now I'm going to get a spotlight to American University. So I'll note that American University is an advanced campus as it relates to all of our area, the institutionalization, critical processes, and programming. We were so, EVERFI was so honored to be on American University's campus just on Monday to present them with a Prevention Excellence Award, because they have demonstrated across all of those areas prevention excellence. And I'm going to talk only about one specific part of American University's excellence, focusing in on their institutionalization. So when we think about American, their big story is that they have been intentionally pursuing institutionalization around their sexual violence prevention efforts since 2009, with the initial release of a report from their sexual assault working group. One of the questions that their team has received recently has been, given changes in administration, are you going to back off the subcommittee? Are you going to back off the work that you're doing? What their senior leadership team has said overwhelmingly is that we've been doing this so long, we have no intention of backing off. They have a working group model that has subcommittees attached to them. Those subcommittees, anyone can be a part of. So there's a intentional community-based approach to their work, and they are models of transparency and accountability. They post the minutes for both the working group and their subcommittee minutes online. They set yearly goals, and they hold themselves accountable for their goals. And I just learned that now they've actually started live tweeting the activities of their subcommittees. And I have to say, I want to be the first one to sign up for that Twitter feed. I think that it would be fascinating. As one of their senior leadership members noted, the trick to success is recruiting individuals who have both knowledge and passion, maintain that commitment, and have real tangible results. So every year, American seeks to use their assessment and their local data to guide their efforts on campus. And so as an example, in 2016-2017, American University proposed from the data that they received a new investigative model. They've also changed their programming to include smaller, more intimate events where students can meaningfully engage. And this is able to happen at American University because they have that core institutional commitment going back nearly a decade now of a working group over the entire institution who is able to identify priorities for the institution, set goals, and hold themselves accountable to their community and to each other. We're so proud to be able to spotlight Americans' work in this area, and it is an institution that I would point other universities and colleges to as they're looking to identifying what can be a model for an effective working group on their college campus. Okay, now we're going to turn to critical processes. And we're talking about the glue really that brings all of this work together. So in our sexual assault diagnostic inventory, we currently do not have the category for policies. We have the expectation that every school and college is meeting the minimum expectations as it relates to the federal mandates, certainly the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act, but also other state mandates as well. And so we assume as a floor that campuses are meeting that minimum expectation. And so these critical processes seek to build on those minimum expectations. One of the things that is so important when we're looking at critical processes is thinking about that programming frequency, because we know that a one and done is not going to do it as it relates to changing behaviors, beliefs, or even shifting knowledge over a period of time that oftentimes we see when we have big one and done events, that there can be a brief bump in knowledge acquisition, though usually not in beliefs and certainly not in behaviors. But even that bump in knowledge acquisition tends to peter out rather rapidly. And so it's really important to be doing programming over a period of time and be doing a diverse range of programming that is targeted at specific stakeholders. So here we can see that most campuses, they're doing programming with undergraduate students 1 or 2 times a year, 23%, 1 or 2 times a semester, 25%. Our advanced campuses are doing this kind of programming 1 or 2 times per week. And so thinking about, and this doesn't necessarily have to be those big events. When you think about that critical processes and considering your programming frequency, lots of different kinds of programming and programming opportunities can funnel into this. So we see that for our undergraduate students. We see a huge drop in this critical processes programming frequency when it comes to our faculty and staff. And so as you're looking at your own programming frequency, where are we setting our goals? Are we going to try to do at least some kind of programming 1 or 2 times a month? Are we doing some kind of programming 1 or 2 times a week for our undergraduate students? And then let's look at our campus faculty. Do we have the same level commitment for those faculty and staff? We see here that we have far more likely to be 1 or 2 times a year. What happens when we are not reaching out to our campus faculty and our campus staff and making sure that they have the programming to be effective in their roles and also to address concerns that may be going on in their own lives, is that we're missing out on a fundamental part of the shaping of the norms and the environment in our campus. Certainly we know that campus faculty and also campus staff, from the president all the way to individuals who may be seasonal workers, having everyone be a part of the sexual violence prevention efforts creates that climate of culture change that is most likely going to lead to the shift to positive knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, beliefs. So we're looking here, so we talked a little bit about that critical processes, the programming frequency for our advanced institutions. And you can see here that, again, as I noted earlier, 100% of our institutions that are doing the best work in prevention education are reaching their undergraduate students 100% of the time. Now, I'll note that our instrument right now does not collect information on our graduate and professional students, and that's an important question to ask internally. What are we doing for our graduate and our professional students? Is it on par with what we're doing for our undergraduate students? Are we providing for them also developmentally appropriate programming over a period of time, more than once a year, or more than when they're arriving on campus? At this stage, for most campuses, that answer is not yet. And I think that this is really a place where we can grow. All right, so when we think about then our critical processes, both our theories and our logic models, this is a place where I'm excited to note that of the nearly 100 institutions who have completed the diagnostic inventory, 80% are basing their programming on at least one theoretical model. Again, this is really great news. And so the 20% have an opportunity to think about basing their information on a theoretical model that has embedded within it a behavior change model, so that there is an understanding on your campus when you're doing that programming of how the programming that you are implementing is intended to create change in that, again, those knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. What we see is that among our advanced schools, who are doing the best work in prevention education, we see that 73% of them are using logic models. And we're going to dive into a little bit more those logic models. So I've just popped up one of my favorite diagrams in the whole world. I always joke that if I had an opportunity to get a tattoo, I would actually get it of the socio-ecological model that I popped up. And the reason why I want to make sure that we focus on this for a second is because when we're thinking about our theories and our programming, we want to make sure that we are doing programming that is, addressing students at the individual level, within their relationships, in the communities that they're embedded in, and societally, because of course the behaviors and the beliefs that students bring to us are formed at the individual level. So individual characteristics are a part of students' behaviors and belief values that drive the choices that they make. They are certainly formed in those relationships within the communities and within those larger societies. An important reminder for us. Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit more about what we mean when we are talking about a logic model. And so this is a very brief breakdown of a logic model. And I'll note that oftentimes when campuses are beginning to think about a logic model, they start with thinking about what are those inputs? What are the things that we have? And then what problem are we trying? What are the things that we have? And then what can we put in? What is the response to meet our goals that drive our mission? I would propose to you that we actually reverse this strategy, thinking first about what is our mission? What are the goals that we are trying to achieve? What are the responses that we hope to get from the goals that we're trying to achieve? What do we need to put in order to get those goals? And then what are the resources that will be required? So going from mission to inputs versus from inputs to mission is going to be a more effective way to create a logic model that will help you articulate and identify what you are trying to achieve and whether or not you have achieved it. And you'll note here at the bottom that that research and evaluation should be going along all of the work that you're doing. So doing initial formative research to identify what problem are we trying to solve question, the process, have we articulated smart goals? Are they strategic? Are they realistic? Are they time bound? Are they articulated well? And summative. Did we actually achieve what we intended to achieve? So this can sharing this for you as a model that you can follow to help you create that logic model and really move your prevention efforts along. All right, so I noted already that Juniata College is one of our Prevention Excellence Award winners. Literally, we were just on their campus Tuesday, the beautiful campus in central Pennsylvania. And I'm spotlighting Juniata College because they have really some very special processes as it relates to institutionalization. One of the things that makes Juniata College special is that they have strong faculty staff engagement and buy-in. So at Juniata College, they started their programming by having their faculty and their staff engage in bystander intervention training. So they have nearly 100% of their staff have received some training And about 25% of their staff have actually completed the full bystander intervention training at Juniata College. It's Green Dot. And that includes their president, President Troja, and his entire leadership team. So their strategy is to first ground the faculty and staff in bystander intervention and then build from there to spread it to their students so that those they have a persistent institutional presence, ensuring that bystander intervention expectations are ingrained into that institutional fiber. I really love one of the things that Jody Althouse, their sexual violence prevention coordinator, noted when she says, we have an intentional strategy for communicating information about sexual assault prevention, which I'll note is just a core principle of a critical process. It's not just advertising, but living the work, truly culture change, and not just marketing. So the questions we ask ourselves are, how do we sustain and support culture change, and how do we reinforce it? I'll note that another core commitment at Juniata College is a strong relationship with their athletics department. So, creating those relationships across campus and ensuring that those individuals who have responsibility over significant portions of campus are at the table creating policy and ensuring that those policies are enacted in ways that are effective, consistent, and meaningful. And now I'm going to turn to programming. So the tip of the spear, as you will. When we think about programming, the questions that we're asking are the who, the what, the when, the how, and the how often. So when we were thinking about critical processes, we were looking at the programming frequency. We were also looking at the preparation of staff to be able to do that programming. Are your staff appropriately trained to be able to do this work well? And now we're going to dive into what that programming might look like. From our sexual assault diagnostic inventory data, what we see is that we have a lot of intentional programming collaboration with community partners. And this is so important in a practice that I think is particularly important for those campuses out there that are community colleges or that are more like commuter colleges, where students are deeply based in their communities. Having that community collaboration when it comes to prevention education programming is wonderful because it creates a bridge for your students to be able to access those resources within their community as they may be moving in and out of being a student at your institution, or as they mostly base their lives within the communities that they're living versus on campus, which can be more the case for our residential institutions. So we're excited to see that 60% are engaging meaningfully with community partners. We would like to see this number grow. And we also see that 87% of campuses are engaging those campus prevention pros, which is fabulous because, of course, campus prevention professionals, and I know I see many of you whom I have the pleasure of having worked with in the past on this webinar. Campus prevention pros are really going to be able to provide that the professional expertise to be able to identify what practices are going to be, or what programs are going to be best suited for your institution, be able to help campuses integrate their campus-specific data to make choices about the kinds of programming that are going to be most effective for your campus, and are going to help be able to track the efficacy of those programs over time. So it's really exciting to see that campus prevention pros are a part of most campuses' prevention efforts. If you are a campus that doesn't yet have a campus prevention professional as a part of your staff team, this can be a place that you may wish to look to when you're making a significant investment in your prevention efforts on your campus. On the other side of the screen, we see here peer educator use. And so we see that most organizations are using peers for some of their prevention efforts. Only 7% are using them for all the prevention efforts. And so we see that most campuses are using both a mix of prevention professionals and peer educators. Certainly the research data demonstrates that peer education programs can be a very effective means for prevention programming. But there are a few caveats to that prevention, to using peer educators. Certainly we endorse a model that has both peer educators as well as prevention professionals guiding the work of those peer educators. And it's so essential that those peer educators be well trained to be able to execute the roles that are given them on campus and be supervised by professional staff in that role. Certainly, we look at these principles of effective prevention, and I want to highlight a couple of different pieces. We're going to be returning to that peer education piece in just a minute when we talk about our last campus highlight. But we're looking here at, we want to be cultivating positive relationships in our prevention programs. So really basing our programs in the positive behaviors that students, the majority of our students evidence on campus. They want to have healthy relationships, that they want to help create a safe environment and to really harness those positive relationships. Programs need to be socioculturally relevant. So, and this is something that's embedded in the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act as well. So those programs really need to be based on what is important for your community. What are your community values and norms as a college, and then looking even more specifically at your specific student populations who are at greater risk for experiencing harm, ensuring that the programs you're delivering to them are also socioculturally relevant. They need to be appropriately timed, and so and they need to have and be developmentally centered, so that you're delivering education to your audiences at the times in which they're able to make use of that information most effectively. One example I really like to give here is looking, for example, at your bystander education efforts. So a lot of programs, bystander education programs, deliver a variety of different mechanisms for intervention. And of course, and this is well established that we need to be providing students with a wide variety of different interventions. But when we drill down, sometimes we see that the examples or the scenarios that are offered to our incoming first-year students more often are illustrating a direct approach. Most incoming first-year students do not have the social confidence or the social capital to turn to a direct intervention approach as their first step when they're seeking to interrupt behaviors of harm. And so as an example of appropriately timed, one strategy that campuses can use is to highlight for their incoming students who have the least social capital on campus, those delegation strategies of intervention, or those distract categories of intervention, to make sure that students are getting the kinds of strategies that they're most likely to use and seeing them enacted in realistic ways. We've talked about sufficient dosage. We've talked about outcomes evaluated, theory-driven, and a well-trained staff. And then I'm just going to note here at the bottom that comprehensive. So oftentimes programs that have not yet engaged in a strategic plan and don't have a logic model that is informing the work that they're doing, they can be doing a ton of efforts on campus, a ton of programming, but there's not a common link that's connecting all of that programming together. So it becomes hard to identify what are the learning outcomes for all of the work that we're doing. Do these pieces reinforce each other in meaningful ways, or are we sometimes sending contradictory messages? So when we're looking at comprehensive, we want to make sure that all of the programming that you're doing on campus is aligned, that it has a common core philosophy, and that it reinforces the learning and behavioral outcomes that you've set as for your campus. Okay, so I promised I would return to the training of peer educators, and I think it's important to spend a few more minutes on this, especially as it is a practice that so many campuses have chosen and that the research literature enforces as being effective. What we know that peer education training needs to cover is that it should be a part of a comprehensive vision for student health and wellness, so that your peer educators see sexual violence prevention as being one part of a broader holistic wellness that students that they want to support in students. It should include information about self-care, burnout, and compassion fatigue. Even students who are only delivering prevention education material information on campus and who are not engaging in survivor care, for example, often are the recipient of disclosures and or other kinds of information that can wear on students and provide and create some secondary trauma. So you want to really help your peer educators by building their skill set around resiliency and making sure that they are caring for themselves on a regular basis. Certainly, peer education training should include just a ton of information about how to have challenging conversations with fellow students. When we're engaging in culture change information, we are disrupting a lot of the norms that have been set on campus. And so preparing students to really meet that challenge in a compassionate and meaningful way that then guides that questioner to a new understanding and doesn't create conflict and discord is a specific skill that needs to be reinforced over time. Making sure that those peer educators have information about resources on campus and off campus that are available to them and that are available to the students that they're engaging with is really important as well. If your peer educators have a role or responsibility for reporting, making sure they understand how they can execute that role and how they're not going to overstep the role that they've been given. So it's making clear those expectations and making clear the boundaries of that role, and making sure that they are aligned with the preferred language, concepts, institutional messaging that your campus has decided on that you're going to use around your sexual violence prevention programming. We see here that our peer educators overwhelmingly are getting about 1 to 5 hours of peer educator training. We'd like to see all peer educators getting at least 20 hours of peer education training. Going through all of those pieces that I just identified requires more than 1 to 5 hours time. And so for those campuses that are engaging in sexual violence prevention training through peer educators, if you're going to use peer educators, make sure that you're doing the investment to give them the appropriate training so that they're going to be able to be effective in their role. And now we turn to our last campus, the University at Buffalo. And I'm focusing, as you may expect, for the University at Buffalo, which is, again, one of our Prevention Excellence Award winners. We are going to be visiting their campus this coming October. And they have a remarkable peer education programming. At the University of Buffalo, they really believe in the participatory planning process, that public health approach that is most visible in their peer education program. So SUNY University at Buffalo has created a 3-tier approach to leadership that provides a path for students to identify their desired level of engagement and be supported in that engagement through rigorous training appropriate to the role that they've chosen and ongoing supervision. There's an assessment and evaluation happening at every level of their peer education program that measures intended outcomes not only of the programs that they're delivering, but also intended outcomes of those peer educators themselves. They intentionally prioritize self-care and skill building. So their participatory planning process extends not only to their 3-level peer education program, but also shows up in other innovative programs like Alliance, which is their non-clinical empowerment and self-care group for survivors, and their UB Men's group. Both of these groups emerged from a careful review of their institution-specific data that again identified a gap between the desired needs and what the campuses were offering. All of their programming efforts Those peer education efforts and all of their outreach efforts are evaluated for effectiveness, and they have all identified skill-based outcomes that are being measured so that they have this rich set of data that can funnel back into their prevention efforts going forward. One of their prevention professionals on campus said to us that progress happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I think that that's so beautifully stated when we're looking at what those peer educators need in order to be effective and how we can harness the work that they're doing to be able to push the needle forward. So when we're thinking about programming, a couple more minutes here, we're really looking at who are we reaching and who we're not reaching. So this slide is looking again at our national data, and what we can see is that 100% of the campuses who have completed our diagnostic inventory are fulfilling that responsibility, that mandate through the VAWA Amendments to the Clery Act. They're reaching out to their first-year students, and they're also reaching those opinion leaders on campus, their RAs, their athletes, their student leaders, and their Greek life. And this is really important, and this is a positive sign. But what we also see on the right-hand side of the screen here is that our students who campus climate survey after campus climate survey after campus climate survey has identified are more likely to experience harm are also not being targeted with specific programming that's designed to meet their needs and are designed to reduce their likelihood of victimization. And so our LGBTQ students, our students who have already experienced harm, our racial or ethnic minority students, those with disabilities, and our non-traditional students. So this is a place where we've identified that as a movement, we really need to do more and better work in reaching these specific students who we now know are at greater risk for experiencing harm. It can be, I think, a challenge for campuses to create programming around these for these specific students because there is not a lot yet developed. I would point those who are interested in taking a current program that you have and adapting it to meet the interests or needs of these specific students to take a look at a webinar that we did through the Campus Prevention Network at the end of August with Dr. Michelle Monroe Kramer from the University of Michigan that provides a rigorous tested adaptation process so that any college or university can take a program that they're already using and adapt it to those students that have specific needs on their campus. All right, so let's put it all together then. When we're looking at an effective prevention program, these are those steps for effective prevention efforts. We want to identify those focus areas. So using your campus climate data, one of the things that the AAU report recently noted was that there's a greater awareness of an entire, I think that they use the term an ecosystem of data. So using climate survey data, using data, for example, from online education programs, if you've implemented those on your campus, using data that could be coming from, for example, your National College Health Assessment Fund, using your SERP data. So to do those firm assessments to identify those focus areas. You want to make sure that you're building partnerships across campuses that are meaningful, that are not just showing up to the quarterly meeting, making sure you sign in and checking the box, but are ongoing so that you benefit from the expertise and from the lens of vision of many individuals on your campus and also off your campus. You want to set those specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals. Too few campuses are actually setting specific target goals and then enacting efforts that are intentionally designed to meet those goals. This is a place where I think many, many more campuses can start to set goals, hold themselves accountable to those goals, and we're going to see a shift in the kinds of intentional work happening on campuses when campuses begin to do that across the board versus in a haphazard manner. We always want for campuses to be focused on best practice. Compliance is the baseline. It's what all campuses should start as their threshold and build from there, and making sure that what they build is informed by research, so that there is the greatest likelihood that it is going to be effective. You need to secure needed resources on campus, and hopefully building those fruitful partnerships is going to be a part of ensuring that you have the foundation and the data to be able to make asks for resources that are most likely to yield the outcomes that you're looking for. You want to make sure that what you decide to deliver, that you deliver well. We know that programs can be implemented even with the best of intentions and do more harm than good when they're not implemented with fidelity. So we want to make sure that that's happening. You've heard across all of the areas that I've discussed today, assessment for impact and efficacy. Absolutely, we need to be able to articulate what every program is trying to do and identify whether or not it actually did what it was intended to do. So identifying those outcomes you intend for programs and identifying ways in which you will measure those outcomes for those programs. Sharing the outcomes of the work that you're doing widely with the campus is something that I also think is a place for us to grow as a field. I recently had opportunity to chat with Tulane University, and they have a program where every year they have an entire day where when they release their Clery findings, they really pause and make an entire community event out of the release of those Clery findings. And they also release all of the information about the ways in which their campus responded to sexual violence in their community. That's one model of transparency and disseminating findings. But it's also really important to disseminate those findings and disseminate information about the efficacy of your prevention programs. Too often there is an unfounded belief that sexual violence prevention is not possible. It absolutely is possible, and we need to be sharing our success stories with our campus. And then iterating and improving from efforts, learning from the past, and being open to new ideas as well. So I hope that I have you excited about participating in our sexual assault diagnostic inventory, having your campus-specific information on where you line up against best practices as it relates to prevention in those areas to help you identify what can be some next places where you put some intentional strategic focus for your campus. I want to strongly encourage everybody who's on this webinar to join our Campus Prevention Network. This is a resource that is available to any campus across the country. It is a free resource through the Campus Prevention Network. Not only do you get access to the sexual assault diagnostic inventory, but you also get access to blogs, to other webinars, to white papers that we've developed, all of which are available to you at no cost, that we create in order to really help drive the field forward. At EVERFI, we're committed to creating safe and healthy campuses for all students, staff, and faculty to live, learn, and work. And so this is our commitment to moving the prevention community forward in this area. So 3 critical steps. Last but not least, how can you do it? You're going to go to the Campus Prevention Network. We encourage you to take the pledge, take that diagnostic inventory, and then again, make those informed decisions based on your diagnostic inventory about how you want to make that next step forward in your prevention efforts. We talked a lot already about these CPN resources. And this is the pledge. This is what we'll ask of you. My institution pledges to embody the mission of the Campus Prevention Network. As a member of the CPN, my institution is committed to assessing our efforts and striving towards best practice. I hope that this is a pledge that every person on this webinar will feel committed to and will make the choice to commit to.
Great, thank you so much, Holly.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Holly. And this is Laura again. I just wanted to take a quick second to reference the first step tool that we have highlighted here and that we have linked within the files pod here for you all as well. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that we have developed, and we are calling a sample primary prevention program plan. So to take all of the foundational information that Holly has been describing to you today and to put it into practice, we thought it might be helpful to highlight, perhaps by month and then areas of focus, suggested programs that could take place for both students and employees on your campuses that would tackle some of the goals that are required through the VAWA Amendments to Clery. And so if you'll notice at each tab on the bottom of the spreadsheet, there is a different month of a calendar, of an academic year. When you click on that tab, you'll see suggested areas of focus at the top that might pertain to already recognized National Awareness Month for that month, or activities that happen to be going on that month. For example, in October, since Halloween often causes a lot of parties to happen where people wear costumes or consume substances that might cause additional acts of violence to happen, then it might be worth focusing on some risk reduction or some bystander intervention that month. And so then through each of those tabs, we have suggested program offerings, and then connected learning objectives to each of them. And then the final tab is evaluating all programs that you do based on different elements that, and this is pulling strictly from the regulations, of aspects that should be involved in your prevention programming. Once again, not every program needs to have all of those elements, but at some point over the course of an academic year, you should be touching on each of those elements for both students and employees. And so that hopefully gives you a rubric by which to start evaluating what your programs do and do not tackle and how they tackle those things. So again, this is just a sample. It is not saying this is the be-all, end-all way to do prevention programming, but we hope that it offers you a place to start, or even just an organization method to start to use to think about how you structure your programming currently and how you evaluate it for meeting the requirements of the Clery Act. And so with that said, we definitely do want to give some time for folks to ask Holly some questions with the remaining time we have in our webinar today. Some folks have already been asking some through our portal here, so we want to highlight a couple of those. I know one that was asked was, Holly, as giveaways have already been stated to be not very effective, are there some that you do recommend?
So when you're thinking about giveaways, I always want the question to ask is, when I'm giving this giveaway, what is the outcome that I am intending with this giveaway, and how am I going to measure it? So, I think that I don't want to black mark all giveaways, but I think that what you need to do is make sure that you're connecting it to an intentional outcome that you've identified. So let me give you an example here. One outcome, say you decide that you're going to give out t-shirts to all participants who have completed a certain level of training. One outcome that you might want to identify is that through the giving away of these t-shirts, our campus community will see an increase in the positive acceptance that sexual violence is not going to be a part of our community, and so that every person who wears a t-shirt would be able to speak effectively to that issue. Now, then you've attached your t-shirt to a pretty important learning outcome, and you can measure that, for example, through routine campus climate surveys that ask students, how do you know that this is an issue that our campus cares about? One of the things is that we see people wearing t-shirts and they're able to talk about it. So I mean, that's an off-the-cuff example, but I think that it's, again, thinking about not only, what does your budget dollar per student piece look like? That's a really telling thing to actually do the per student dollar ratio, and also how are you strategically spending those dollars? Those are really two really important pieces to ask. If you do giveaways, make sure that you have an intended outcome that giveaway supports and that you know how you'll measure it.
Awesome. That makes
Great question. I
Yeah,
love
no,
that
that's a
question.
really great question and some really great thoughts to think about in moving forward and in answering and addressing that question. So thanks so much for that question and for your answer, Holly. There was another question that we just saw come through that I believe another individual on the webinar answered partially, but wanted to throw it to you as well, Holly, to see if you had anything to add. But a question that came through was if anybody or you, Holly, have any programming information on educating and reaching international students on sexual assault and sexual health.
Oh, yes. I have to say, this is probably maybe number 2 or number 3 question that we get asked. And I just want to be really transparent to say, I think that this is a place where we as a field have a lot more work to do. I'll note a couple of campuses' efforts to engage this issue. One of the things that overwhelmingly college campuses are identifying is that, well, number one, we talk about international students, but boy, is that a hugely diverse bucket. Like an international student can be, a Canadian student who has been, going to school, 20 minutes over the border their entire lives, or it can be somebody who, is learning in an English language institution for the first time, coming to the U.S. for the first time and enrolling on their campus. Certainly our students from China are different from our students from Africa, who are different from our students from Australia and from Croatia and from Mexico. So I just want to acknowledge that that's a hugely diverse bucket. With that, I do think that there can be ways to make sure that use those best practices for engaging with specific communities, right? So one of the things that the University of Michigan did was create a program for international students that was built by a wide range of international students. So international students who came to the table with University of Michigan sexual violence prevention experts to identify what would a curriculum look like. And for that campus, their curriculum started with identifying, recognizing and identifying and celebrating that we have many different cultural values as it relates to how we create relationships, how we acknowledge relationships, and that those cultural differences are something that we value, and also that those cultural differences can make a difference in the kinds of ways in which we interpret behavioral cues when it comes to interpersonal relationships or even relationships with faculty and staff. So then taking from that foundation, building on how international students can check in to make sure that they're understanding the context of the cultural cues they think they're receiving was the strategy that the University of Michigan approached their international student training with. And that then built on the pieces that all international students, incoming international students, as incoming students were required to receive. So it was an in-person program that was designed to dovetail with the universal population program. I know that other campuses have done other kinds of programs. I know I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of this campus in specific, but some campuses have implemented homegrown online programs that outline institutional values. That's another approach. But for campuses that are going to be building anew their international student program, I really strongly encourage you to look at the ADAPT, ADAPT-ITT, ADAPT model, which provides, again, I noted earlier, a rigorous scientific method for adapting sexual violence prevention programs to meet specific community needs.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. That's such a thorough answer. Really appreciate it. Another quick question that I would just throw to you, Holly, is one that came through a little bit earlier, but it's a good one, and I think it applies to a lot of folks. Are there any recommended training programs that you recommend for prevention professionals who are newer in the field?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. And I think that the professional organization CAPA um, is a great resource to look at the kinds of training that prevention professionals who are working on college campuses foundationally need. I'm a little hesitant to endorse specific programming models. I'll note simply because you know we well, for all the reasons that we know, that sometimes it's difficult to endorse specific programs. I will note though that the National Organization for Victim Advocacy, NOVA, has a new online campus advocacy program. Now, it's not focused specifically on prevention professionals, it's focused on advocates. So for those on-campus prevention professionals who also have an advocacy role, that can be a great resource for their advocacy roles. I know that the NASPA Strategies Conference, which is specific to alcohol and other drugs, sexual violence, and mental health issues, many folks find that that is a really great starter place to really understand the field and to get a foundation in some of these public health theories that undergird the best prevention work happening.
Wonderful.
I would also note that our campus prevention network is a great place for professionals across the the experience spectrum to turn for information about what are some promising approaches in the field.
Wonderful. Another quick question, and I think Abby and I could even speak to this one too, was are peer educators paid positions? And as many individuals answered in the group chat already, it depends. It depends on how your institution structures that role. For some, it's a leadership position on campus. For some, it is a part-time position, a paid position. For some, it could be a work study position. So I think it would depend and could be whatever you want to make it, especially, again, depending on the focus or the intention of the role. But I just didn't know if you had anything else to add to that, Abby or Holly.
I don't on my end. I think that was a good summary of kind of the different structures that we see on campuses.
Yeah, and I would just note that this is another place where you may wish to think about what are the goals for your peer education program. So some campuses, and what are the resources that you have available. Some campuses choose to not pay their peer educators, but enroll them in a course so they can take the class for credit. That can allow individuals who may have to work while they're attending school to afford school to also participate in a peer education program. I think that there are important questions to ask about access. So if you're looking to increase the diversity of your peer educators, thinking about ways in which you can provide support for a diverse range of students to be a part of your peer education program is really important. Having those be paid positions for some campuses is the right approach. Other campuses achieve that diversity and robust student engagement through other kinds of incentives.
Great, awesome. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question, and this question is, what types of programs can we use to target faculty and staff concerning reporting?
Oh my gosh, I was having webinar regret just a second ago because I should have put in a slide that actually, I should have put in a slide that actually shared some of the data that we're getting from the online courses around faculty and staff training that we've implemented, across the country. I'll just share with you that one of our significant findings is that prior to taking their course, and these are institutions across the entire country. They really have the breadth and depth of the 1,700 schools that we work with. But of those faculty and staff, when their pretest says that 12% of those faculty and staff know what their reporting responsibilities are and know how to execute them. It jumps to about 37%, which is a great follow-up outcome, for any training, in person or online, but holy macaroni, is that still a gap between where we are and where we need to be? So I think that taking those principles of effective training that we already often apply to students and applying those to our faculty and staff as well. There's a blog post that articulates a lot of this on the Campus Prevention Network around faculty and staff training. Just like our students, the one and done for faculty doesn't work either. I think that having a universal approach to education so that all faculty are getting some information and then going program by program so that you can tailor the staff and faculty training to the specific cultural environment of, for example, that department or that group of workers is really important as well. I'm going to actually be presenting on this with Kelly Brennan, who's the Title IX coordinator at Ohio State University, at the ATICSA conference next week. So maybe some of you will be there and you can catch our session. It's such a great question, but I think thinking strategically about how do we give everybody baseline information, and then how do we customize it? And at some point, all of our institutions are going to have to butt up against that hard rock of mandating faculty training. The voluntary approach works so well at some institutions, and Juniata was an example. But for many institutions, the voluntary approach means that only the most invested faculty are actually engaging in it, and we need for all faculty who have responsibilities to actually be prepared to execute those responsibilities. So I think that's a hard boulder that we all have to stick our shoulder against and actually push on.
That's awesome. Thank you, Holly. I know you have given us so much great content and information to think about today, but the things that come out or that stick out the most for me right now are hashtags that will be trending, such as webinar regret, holy macaroni, and your socio-ecological model tattoo. So thank you so much for making us laugh as much as giving us things to hold on to when we are doing this really hard work. So you really made us giggle here, so thank you for that. There's one last question that we might have a chance to answer. It's another great one, and it's a very important question, but it is a question from an individual who is saying their organization is looking to deliver curriculum to recent high school graduates before they leave home. And so if there are any particular learning targets you would suggest, their work is designed to, as they write, begin to influence the knowledge, behaviors, and beliefs of these individuals before they actually arrive on campus. So what would you suggest, Holly, maybe? Yeah.
Oh, yes. I love this question. So this is a great place to start norming those values of your institution. So I would take the data that you have, and I hope that you do have data around, what are your students' perceptions and beliefs around, for example, creating a caring community, intervening with others. What are your institutional values? And start messaging that information about what are the kinds of expectations and behaviors that make a successful student to those incoming students from the beginning. I love this. I want to point out a couple of additional ways to build on that curriculum that you deliver before students arrive on campus. And I'll just note that online training is a great way to reach pre-matriculation students. It's certainly a practice that our advanced institutions, like some of those I noted, I want to say two things. Vanderbilt University and Dartmouth College were also Prevention Excellence Award winners who have done remarkable work. I didn't have time to talk specifically about their programs as well, but I want to give them a shout out. But online education is a great way to reach pre-matriculation students. Here's a few other ways. Embed some speaking points in your student tour guide script. This is a great time to talk about what are your values and how those related to, what are your institution values and how they relate to building healthy relationships and building a safe, supportive community. So work with your campus tour guides to build speaking points in there. Don't miss the opportunity for parent orientation to tell parents what you want them to message to their students in this final summer. And remind those parents that even though their students may not act like they're listening, they actually are. The data demonstrates this, right? That parents still have a really important influence. So, so do that pre-matriculation piece. Start it even before they accept. Make it be the norm of your campus environment, and then get parents in on that communication early. They're desperate to do something. They're out trying to find extra long sheets already. Give them something even more meaningful to do with their students. Those would be those pieces.
That's great. Thank you so much, Holly. Super helpful. So we were just